Does anyone think protectionism is a good idea?
No!
Well, for me it is.
Well, yeah, if you own a business with being protected, right?
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Well, the rest of you guys, no, I'm working for them, yeah.
The idea is if you protect a business with tariffs, then there'll be more Americans employed.
Yeah.
But that's not true, because all you're doing is, when you protect a business, you're importing less stuff, so you're exporting less money, and then that's less money for that nation to buy stuff with in your more productive industries, where you have comparative advantage. And so I was going to talk about comparative advantage. So you don't want to protect businesses that that foreign competitors do better in, right? Because you're just shifting the workers and so you just shift the workers from the industries that would be exporting to the industries that are protecting. So the comparative advantage of buying from the foreigners, they can produce it cheaper, so they send it to us, and then we can send them something we produce cheaper, and then overall we're more productive. So that's just comparative advantage. And then there's the case of absolute advantage, where one nation is just more productive across the board, right? Like some people might say China just makes everything cheaper because they don't have an EPA or minimum wage laws and all that stuff, so it's unfair. And I have an example of how even with absolute advantage we still want to trade, because it just benefits both parties. So let's say it takes you a day. So this is an example of absolute advantage. So let's say it takes a day to build a cabinet or to paint a picture. And in the local economy, paintings sell for $400 and cabinets go for $350. And your neighbor shares the same skill set, but it takes him a day and a half to build a cabinet and 3 days to complete a painting. So in this case, you have an absolute advantage over your neighbor, and you could outproduce him across the board. If you outproduce him across the board in a 6-day work week, you'll produce 3 paintings and 3 cabinets. It takes a day to produce each one for you. So that's $2,250. And then your neighbor has to do the same work schedule, because that's the way demand is, because you're doing it half and half. So he'll produce 1 painting, 2 cabinets, and that's worth $1,100. So with that, you collectively produce 4 paintings and 5 cabinets. Now, if you were to do the more profitable thing and just do paintings, then you would produce $2,400 at 6 paintings. Yeah.
It would have I could make AutoZone versus Snap argument for you right there.
Okay.
Currently went for 3 alternation AutoZone from China. One from American made one. The one from American made one with better quality. You sacrifice production, well, it's cheaper rate, but it's what quality went down in quality.
Well, it's cheaper and it's more higher quality. So
it's not really high quality. It's
right. Okay.
Actually,
You have a
example
Chinese.
assumes that the goods are exactly the same.
Yeah, this is an example, right?
Go with the example.
Yeah.
We realize that no 2 goods are ever exactly the same.
We're talking economics, so we have to start with assuming everything is equal. A simple hypothetical.
Not a good argument.
Yeah.
Right. But
I mean, that's what you have to do in theory. When you get down to specific examples, make discussions what happens.
I mean, I'll answer your question.
I don't want to step on it.
Because you can have stuff produced in China and produced in the United States, right? Different qualities and different costs.
Well, China, I can also go to pay Inspector A off and say, well, these sellers which are defective are good, which happens all the time in radio. And here actually, you can pass it, Inspector A in China, if you pass it, we're going to put in a penalty jet. Which happens, you see the quality go down in quality.
Right, but then when it hits the market in the United States, they realize that the quality is crap, and then they don't buy it.
No, actually, it's still buy it.
Well, it depends upon how critical it is. I mean, go ahead.
Well, I mean, sometimes they can produce 4 at the cost it takes us to produce 1, right? Getting too bad. Anyways, I was in the middle of an example, but we were at, you could produce 6 paintings at $2,400, And then your neighbor will be forced to produce the 4 cabinets because you took up all the demand for the paintings, and that's worth $1,400 bucks. And in production terms, you actually made 10 units, where before you made 9. So that's the absolute advantage example. And so Britain provided support for comparative advantage during the Industrial Revolution by outsourcing its food growth and focusing on manufacturing goods. So they basically outsourced their food and you know, probably did way, you know, they were the lead in the Industrial Revolution because of that. And then there's the infinite,
So I think the point you're trying to make is even though they had Britain had a comparative advantage on both, they had a higher comparative advantage on industrial production, so it made sense for them to outsource their food production so they could allocate more capital to their relatively higher comparative advantage in...
Well, they had an absolute advantage in both, and they had a comparative advantage in the production of things.
Right. Okay. So, and that's why you can still trade with countries that you have an absolute advantage over in both.
Usually there's the opportunity cost, and I'm going to let Matt take care of that.
Opportunity cost?
Well, I'm assuming you're leaving it, but I don't know.
And just to give an example, I'm not trying to interject or
No, that was my job.
yeah. There's kind of an age-old example that just makes it easy to think about. It's a good analogy, and I'm not trying to be offensive to anybody here who might be a secretary, but there's kind of an age-old example of there's a town where there's a lawyer who's the best lawyer in the town, and he's theoretically the best secretary in the town if he wanted to be a secretary. He has the highest word per minute, and he's the best at secretarial duty. But it makes more sense for him to focus on legal services and to hire a secretary because he makes $500 an hour and he can pay a secretary $10 an hour to do the same thing. So that's basically kind of what you were saying, that even though you might be the best at something that's more trivial, it makes sense to focus on your core competency and outsource something that might be a little cheaper to do.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So that's opportunity cost in a nutshell, but
Can
I
I,
don't know if you're done with your presentation or not.
I was going to talk about a couple of examples of Brazil and stuff, but I mean, we're running pretty low on time, so I guess
can I interject a political observation? I don't know of any formal system of economics that is
that's correct, yeah.
that is protectionist. They may be, some political theories, protectionist around the edges or on the margins, but as a rule, for all the formal theories, say, taking advantage of comparative advantage and using free trade increases the aggregate prosperity of a nation. But in our world, our politics are pretty much divided between two groups. Ones that think that aggregate prosperity, the overall wealth, is the most laudable goal, that a rising tide lifts all boats. And the other political opinion who says that some people, maybe a majority of persons rather than economic units, would suffer under the most open and prosperous market that you could arrange, and therefore you do not want an open and prosperous market. That if you put thousands of auto workers out of business or agricultural workers out of business, that's too much steep a price to pay for the overall prosperity of the country. I think you could divide our political groups into people who stand on either side of that. Either you do believe in the long run the rising tide lifts all boats, or you think that a real open economy is fundamentally unfair or unjust, no matter how much extra wealth it creates. So, but that's but that's the expected. I mean, the arguments against protectionism, I know them, except that they will not really convince any of the people who pro-protectionist.
Yeah, well,
because they've got a job on the line, they've got an industry on the line, they have a whole culture on the line.
Only have to go
yeah, I mean, it's the visible, right? You can see auto workers getting laid off, but you can't see.
The unseen is a very important piece. That's
You can't see the export
GM, all right,
industry.
so everyone looks
Okay.
at GM, and why did we bail out GM? Because, well, really, it was
no, it's UAW, because if
But in the free market, what would have happened is they would have went bankrupt, they would have restructured, somebody new would have come in,
right.
could run it more efficiently and actually produce good cars that people wanted, and yes, the unions and their pensions would have been...
And meanwhile now GM actually outsources more of its industrial production, car production, outside the country than does Toyota. So apparently I heard that Accord is like the most American-built car or something, whereas a lot of these GM cars, you know, Chinese people are making those parts.
Good cars, and they're done really well, but now, you know, they have to...
And what was the point you wanted to make?